morning, everyone, or yes, still morning at most of the people tuning in. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak here. And in so much as any of my experiences can be helpful to people, would love to hear from you all and just let me know if I can be of help. I don't have many slides. I just want to present an outline here of what I want to be talking about today. And then we'll launch into my story, and then leave ample time at the end for people to ask questions about my particular path or our particular path through funding our company and what roles non-dilutive funding played. So first off, I'll start off with an intro to the company, give you what I think are defining characteristics of it and why it set us up for grant funding quite well. Tell you a bit about us, the co-founders, go into more detail about the funding path, and then some of my experiences working with different grant consultants, including FMG, who we're currently working with, and then just wrap up with some summary of tips that I personally have experienced and distilled out of this whole process. They follow up on the previous speakers, excellent and very, very relevant tips, but these are more sort of like based on personal experience and sort of insider tips. And then leave some time for Q&A. And that's my email down below. I'll share it in the chat after this too. So please feel free to reach out anytime. Any of you listening, if you have any questions. So Abalone Bio, we're a platform therapeutics company, and we develop novel antibody drugs that are enabling treatments to previously inaccessible diseases. Right? So we're developing these special kinds of antibody-based drugs that we call bioactive antibodies. And they go beyond traditional antibody drugs like the Regeneron COVID drug or the Humira for arthritis, some of the top selling drugs that you may have heard of that are based on antibodies. So those are all really good at blocking and inhibiting biological processes, much like antibodies in our immune systems. So what we've done is we've been able to develop a technology to find these very rare antibodies that can actually activate or tune and regulate cellular processes to sort of restore balance to biological processes, and in that way treat diseases. Okay, so our company was started in 2018, two co-founders, and it was seeded with an initial grant from the NSF. So very much so, they are our seed investors, or the non-dilutive funding is our seed investment. Since grown to a team of 15, we're located in Emeryville, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, and next door neighbors to Oakland and Berkeley. Since we started, we've raised over $5 million in non-dilutive funding from the NSF and the NIH, specifically the NCI and NIDDK, and about $3 million seed capital, so from Y Combinator, Strategic Farm Investment, and a few other seed VCs and angels. So what we've done with this money up till now is we've developed an operational discovery engine for these bioactive antibody drugs. We've identified and developed a drug candidate, and we're setting it up for clinical trials in diabetic neuropathy. And we've established a pharma partnership with a nice 9-figure milestone payment deal attached to that. And right now we're raising our Series A to drive this first drug into human clinical trials and to develop the rest of our pipeline. So moving on to a bit about me and the founding team. So me, I had scientist roots. I started off as an undergrad in physics, computer science back at Berkeley, and moved into biophysics when I realized I was doing all this math, and it was easy to do the math, but I had no idea what I was going to use it for in physics. So then I moved into biophysics. A friend of mine was telling me that one day we're going to engineer carpets that the proteins built in are going to eat dirt, and I thought that was just like the coolest thing ever. This is way back before synthetic biology as we know it today was really clearly defined. So yeah, this merging of sort of engineering and biology together those seeds were planted early on. I moved into structural biology as my way of merging computational and the experimental work. Then that was structural biology, X-ray crystallography work. And then I moved into more of a systems and synthetic biology project for my postdoctoral work. So also, as was previously noted in the intro, before this current company, Abalone Bio, I started another primarily grant-funded biotech startup in the algae biofuel space. And then I also have worked on the other side of the lease and on the other side of the pitch deck and on the other side of the summary statement, actually, in various roles, right? So managing this incubator with 45 some biotech companies there and seeing many of their pitches. And then also I've sat on a number of NIH SBIR review panels. So before we really started applying. So I had a good insight into what the review panels would look like and at least what were some of the consistent things that they were looking for. Speaking personally about who I am, in general, I'm a very sort of like operational, hands-on DIY guy, probably to a fault, right? And I think this is very relevant to the way I and my co-founder worked best with specific types of grant writers. And I think as you're thinking about what types of grant consultants you'd like to work with, I think the match of your work style should really be a key factor in determining that. So yeah, my co-founder and I were definitely cut from the same cloth. We both started off in academia. We wrote papers and grants in that setting and have very deep academic networks, both locally and internationally. So that really did set us up quite well for grant funding for our companies, both companies, particularly Abalone Bio. So in terms of our company and some of the key characteristics that I think informed why we chose the grant-based funding path that we did. So number one, a potentially distinguishing characteristic is that our core IP and technology was internally developed, right? So we didn't have a chance to really de-risk this in a university setting as postdocs or license this out from a laboratory which had already done a lot of the early seed stage de-risking. So we were really started off with an idea and we're going to de-risk this in the company, right? And so you can see where SBIR funding and academic funding are quite related in that sense, funding this really early stage de-risking. I remember some of the seed stage investors that we talked to early on. We would get these people who are saying that we fund bold ideas and this and that. They would say stuff like, "Wait, you want me to pay for research?" So it was a tough sell to many of the people. So the grant funding was absolutely key for us to do that very initial de-risking. In terms of the technology that we're developing too, I think we sit in a interesting point on the risk-reward spectrum, right? So we're not some super sexy bleeding edge therapeutics technology like cell therapies or CRISPR, right? Some of those, so our field is antibodies, right? So what we did is we tried to focus on addressing the big gaps in the market and the needs early on in the discovery end. And then once you find something that works in certain assays, then the rest of it is actually pretty de-risked. We know how to make it at scale. We know, how to all the peculiarities of antibodies and clinical trials and that sort of thing. So that sets you up for certain types of investors, right? So the big vision things where we're going to save the world and we're super disruptive and blah blah blah, all those terms that you see on TechCrunch or whatever. Those tend to support projects or marry projects with tech or vision-driven investors, right? And then on the traditional life science end, much of those investors are much more about the data, right? Like, just show me the data. We really don't care how you found the drug. The drug is where most of the value is. So show me as much data as you can about that. And that's where, again, where the grants really come in handy, because this is about paying for science and generating the data that you need to put a graph on a slide deck, rather than like a really cool picture, right? So, you know, in general, so between the types of people that we are and the types of company that we are, or the type of company that we are, grants were really just a natural way to go. It really spoke to a lot of our strengths. In terms of the buckets of grant applications or grant opportunities for us in this therapeutics platform category that we inhabit, it's largely platform technology, and then assets or drugs or drug candidates or drug hits, if you will, right? Developing those drug hits. And we found, just from our experience, that the platform technology and discovery is generally a harder sell for the NIH. Of course, I've personally seen grants where they're much more about the technologies and it's building that out on the discovery end. But at least in our experience, perhaps for the modality, the antibody modality that we're interested in, or the diseases that we're interested in tackling, the NIH was much more, NIH SBIRs are much more about developing drugs once you're farther along, right? Once you've actually found some hits. But the platform technology is really well suited for the NSF, and I'll go into details a bit about our NSF path and the NIH path as well. And then for the assets, like I said, it's mostly about NIH support, right? So once we started generating hits, and we started getting data that was pointing us in different disease directions, it's much more natural fit for NIH SBIRs. Okay, so our first experience, this is again way back in 2018. This is the seed for our company, was NSF phase 1. And in this section, I'm going to talk a bit about the different types of grant writers that we've worked with, or grant consultants, right? So the first NSF phase 1 that we wrote was with an independent, a duo, a grant writing assistant. So they were more about editing and budgeting and a lot of the clerical work in terms of like making sure you have all the documents filled out and all that stuff, which is super, super important, right? And then my partner and I, my co-founder and I, were focused much more on the science and on the outreach for letters of support and items like customer discovery, right? So in terms of how long and how much effort that took us, it was a full-time effort for us for probably 3 weeks. You know, and I tend to view history through rosy lenses. It was probably actually longer than that, right? So it really took a lot of effort. But on the other hand, it got funded on the first go, right? So we were very fortunate for that. And NSF since then has been an absolute godsend. They've later supported us with phase 2 and multiple supplements. So to build out the platform. So we're extremely grateful for their support. And that's another point, is that as you're doing your sort of cost benefit analyses on, you know, if you're in a startup and, you know, your time is super valuable, right? You know, thinking about the phase 1s as more than just the money that they give themselves, but it's more like a biased or enhanced ticket to getting a shot at a phase 2, right? Which fund at a much higher rate. So though it's important to think of that as well. It's a setup for a phase 2. And then in so this is another experience which I would like you all to learn from. So we submitted our NSF phase 1, and before we heard back from that, we in the following NIH cycle, we applied for 4 SBIRs, right? So ton of work. It was like probably 6 weeks of considered effort. And some of those aims overlapped with the NSF one, which was like a big mistake, right? We thought we would just hedge, and but you know, at the end of the day, what happened was when we heard back from the NSF that we got a fundable score, we basically had to choose, right? So you know, you can withdraw your NSF and take a shot at one or more of the NIHs, or you know, stick with the bird in the hand, which is what we did, right? So we had to withdraw those, 4 SBIR applications, which we spent a lot of time on. And some of them we propagated into later cycles with some modifications. But that was my first bit of big advice is to either familiarize yourself with the rules and the constraints of the different opportunities, or get someone who's very well versed in them and have them work with you, right? I mean, avoiding unforced errors is like, one of the top things to do. Right? So then this NSF support, okay, so we got the NSF support, and then it supported the discovery and initial development of our first drug candidate, right? So we'll go into a little more detail on that. This is a anti-inflammatory molecule that activates a subtype of cannabinoid receptors, not the psychoactive Pink Floyd receptors, as we call them, right, in the brain, but another subclass of the cannabinoid receptors that sit on peripheral neurons and in immune cells. So activating that acts as an analgesic and also as a broad spectrum anti-inflammatory. Right? So this molecule was in the genesis of over 3/4 of our now over $5 million grant haul, right? So we had 4 NIH phase 1 SBIRs that were funded for the application of this drug molecule or related molecules to various disease models, and then also 1 phase 2 for this neuropathy, which we're actually developing our drug for and raising money for in our Series A. So all this data was absolutely critical for both the seed VC raises as well as the Series A raise, which is ongoing. So second bit of advice in terms of granting agencies from our personal experience, NSF, they rightly so really love customer discovery. They run an I-Corps. I know both NIH and NSF run an I-Corps program. For the NSF, we had to do like an I-Corps lean startup boot camp thing, and it's all about like really just getting out there and talking to a whole bunch of people and pressure testing your ideas, not getting stuck in your bubble, which is a very good thing. But they emphasize that quite strongly. From the NIH applications that we've done, they really like, in our experience, I think the major thing that's made a difference is a lot of the supporting documentation, letters of support. Of course, there's some amount of customer discovery as well, but working with prominent academic collaborators. Most of our SBIRs have been with a co-PI in a very prominent lab, which makes sense because they're the disease model experts and the disease expert as well. And we're on the discovery end, so it makes a very natural pairing, right? And then for some of the DoD applications that we have, I have more of what not to do. And that's like, be really, really careful about the rules, right? So like if you miss a single checkbox in their giant checkbox, it's like, it just is rejected, right? So it's really easy to make unforced errors there. So definitely keep track of those. Okay, moving on. In terms of the different grant writers that we've worked with, we're working with FMG right now. Obviously, talking here at this summit, but I did want to relay some of my experiences working with other grant writing consultants. So I mentioned the first ones that we worked with are more about editing and submissions and document tracking. And this is like a huge deal, like I just pointed out for the DoD, right? So if you're not naturally a detail-oriented person, certainly my co-founder and I were not initially, you really need the skill set on your team. We worked with 3 other grant consultants, including MFG, and in general, they sort of break down into, there are a couple categories to think about. One that may be important for you as a startup, right? So there's the billing mechanism, right? So they all have fees. Some are hourly, some are project-based, some are retainer-based, and some have success fees, some don't. So, this, depending where you are in a company, how rich, cash rich or you are, one of these models might better serve your needs. And then in terms of the help style, I found that they either go broad or deep, right? And it's not totally mutually exclusive, but they generally fall into those 2 buckets, right? So it's really important to match this with your grant writing styles. My co-founder and I we're like super detail-oriented people in the science sense, not in the keeping track of documents and stuff. But so we tend to go deep, right? So like my co-founder was the kind of guy who could like, you know, leap in and like in a weekend read 100 papers on something and become an expert in some field, right? So that type of depth in the crafting of a scientific argument and was something that we're quite good at. So we spent a lot of time on ourselves writing and frankly wordsmithing and creation, figure creation, and all that work, right? So we can be quite peculiar and particular around those aspects of the grant, or those components of the grant. So you know, some of the styles of the grant consultants worked with or didn't really work with that. So one of the ones that we worked with was very regimented. There's a process. You know, you write a draft, and they send it, or they start with a draft and they send it to you, and there's 2 cycles, and then that's it, right? There's no opportunity to say, oh, I want to make some last minute edits. You know, they're on a schedule, and it's all about taking multiple shots on goal. And you know, that's one model. You know, others like FMG, they allowed us to work with consultants who molded themselves to our style, and it's very free flowing and you know, frankly more last minute. And you know, what can I say? Some of us work better with deadlines, right? You know, so that worked, it just fit better for us. And you know, truth be told, as we've grown and become a more mature company, and we have other more distributed grant writing, I think we're shifting more towards that more operational style or regimented style of grant writing and handling. So it's good to be able to shift and match your current reality as well. But it's something to really consider, right? The third bit of advice is to just really be honest about your work style, what's important to you, and try to match that with the work style of your consultant. Right? And then just a very brief retrospective on you know, would I have chosen this path again? Looking back, absolutely, 100%. You know, I'm not even talking about the non-dilutive aspect of the funding, but at the end of the day, you know, we got $8 million of work for $3 million raised, right? So that's a lot of leverage for those earlier investors and for the founding team. The work is externally validated, reviewed by peers. There are largely aligned with investors or pharma partners that are also going to be judging us. So that all that feedback that we get from them is super useful, not just for the grant, but also for our later development. So some of the huge pluses in working specifically with FMG here is the validation ended up in some very real dollars, right? So Fremont Investment noticed our grant writing success, and with a strategic partner, a pharma company in Korea, they invested in us. So Ram, the CEO, has some very interesting statistics about their the companies that they work with, a massive database, right? So companies in our bracket of grant writing performance, I have a note here, have over 50% chance of a greater than $700 million IPO or exit within 5 years. So I'll definitely take those odds. That sounds pretty good to me. And then I do want to be honest about some of the minuses in the last couple minutes here. So as we've gotten more focused and more developed in our company, we really need to be careful about our time, and that our work is really driving towards the highest value milestones. And for us in the therapeutic space, that means really pushing the development of our leads, right? So it just means that you have to be very careful when you're applying and writing these grants, that they're crafted so that they very much supplement your company's main goals, right? So there's really no time or bandwidth for exploratory work. Also, the restrictions on the money can be somewhat of an issue, both in terms of the uses as well as the actual mechanics of getting paid. So NSF, it's more of a chunks of lump sums, and NIH is you bill as you go. So there are some you may need some help with working through those mechanisms. It's not super straightforward at times. And the monies that they paid absolutely don't match with the realities of, certainly Bay Area scientist salaries, right? And, post-COVID increase in expenses and stuff. So we're always paying for something out of pocket. The grants are never covering for the work that we're saying we're doing in the grants, which is fine. I'd rather get some coverage than no coverage, but it is something to consider as your budget. Okay. All right. So last few minutes, I just want to wrap up. With my summary of the tips, be really familiar with the rules of the game, or get someone who is. Don't make unforced errors. Second bit of advice: be aware of what the sort of prime movers are for each of the agencies, whether it's customer discovery or letters of support or some combination thereof. Third bit of advice: be really honest about your work style and try to find a good match to the consultant or the firm that you're working with. If there's a clash, it ends up being more of a net loss. And then just as I was listening to the previous talk, to put some numbers on the supporting document work, we found that we spent like a third to a half of our time in those earlier applications on the supporting documentation, the letters of support, customer discovery, networking tech, and that stuff takes a lot of time. It's not like a 10% thing after you write the science part, right? It's a super, super important part of the grant. I think it really has made a difference in our funding rates, which is about 30+%, right? So we're a bit higher than the average. So I think that definitely give yourself a lot of time for the non-science portion. Okay, got a few minutes left. See, there's a chat question here. Great. These look like before. Okay, yeah. Does anyone have any questions in the last few minutes? Oh, I was going to type in the chat my email address. So if you don't want to project your questions now and want to reach out afterwards, please reach out if I can be helpful at all. Let me know. I'm here for you.